It was just a formal portrait of two well-dressed young men, but look more closely at what's hidden in the background. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had catalogued over 6,000 photographs during her decade as lead archivist at the New Orleans Historical Collection, but she had never felt the cold dread that washed over her when she examined this particular image. The photograph arrived in a leather case as part of the Beaumont family estate donation from the Garden District. Most of the collection showed typical 19th-century Louisiana life, plantation scenes, formal gatherings, society portraits. But this one photograph was different. Two young men, clearly brothers based on their similar features, sat in an elegant studio. Both appeared to be in their mid-20s, dressed in expensive suits with silk vests and gold watch chains. The brother on the left had dark hair slicked back, a strong jaw, and an expression of quiet confidence. The brother on the right had lighter hair, softer features, and a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They sat in ornate chairs with carved wooden arms. Between them stood a small table holding a leather-bound book and what appeared to be a decorative silver piece. Behind them hung an elaborate painted backdrop showing a grand plantation house with white columns, sweeping lawns, and gardens. The composition was typical for 1858. What wasn't typical was what Elena noticed in the painted backdrop. At first, it appeared to be artistic shading, darker areas meant to suggest depth and shadow in the painted landscape. But Elena had studied thousands of studio backdrops. This darkness was different. Too specific. Too deliberate. She lifted her magnifying glass, examining the backdrop more carefully. In the painted scene, beyond the grand house, in what should have been decorative background detail, she could make out shapes. Human shapes. Dozens of them, rendered in dark paint that made them almost invisible unless you looked closely. Small figures working in fields. Bent over cotton plants. Lined up in rows. And barely visible in the corner of the painted scene, what looked like small structures, rough wooden buildings that could only be slave quarters. Elena's hands trembled as she held the photograph. The backdrop wasn't just showing a plantation house. It was showing the full reality of a slave plantation, including the enslaved people who made that wealth possible. But they were painted so dark, so deliberately obscured, that casual viewers would never notice them. It was as if the photographer had documented the brothers' wealth and status while simultaneously hiding its source in plain sight. She photographed the image with her high-resolution camera, uploading it to her computer. On screen, magnified until the backdrop filled her monitor, the details became unmistakable. She could count at least 40 small figures in the painted scene. She could see the rough structures of slave quarters. She could even make out what appeared to be an overseer on horseback. In the bottom corner of the photograph, embossed in fading gold, were the words identifying the studio, but the photographer's name was partially obscured by aging and damage to the card. Elena couldn't look away from those hidden figures. 40 people, maybe more, rendered in dark paint, their humanity obscured but their presence undeniable once you knew to look for them. Her phone buzzed. Her colleague, Dr. James Mitchell, a specialist in antebellum Southern history at Tulane University, responded to her urgent text. "Coming now. What did you find?" James arrived within an hour, his usual academic calm replaced by visible concern at Elena's tone. She had the photograph projected on the wall, the painted backdrop enlarged to show every terrible detail. "Look at the background," Elena said, her voice tight. "Behind the plantation house. In the fields. Those aren't shadows or artistic decoration." James approached the projection slowly. He was silent for a long moment, studying the painted scene. Then he pulled out his phone and began taking photographs of the projection from multiple angles. "This is documentation," he said quietly. "Deliberate documentation of the full plantation system. The wealth in the foreground, these young men in their expensive suits. And the source of that wealth in the background, rendered dark enough to be ignored but detailed enough to be counted." Elena pulled up the Beaumont family papers that had accompanied the photograph donation. The brothers were identified as Thomas and William Beaumont, photographed in 1858, just 3 years before the Civil War. The Beaumont family had owned River Oak Plantation, one of the largest cotton operations in Louisiana, located about 60 miles upriver from New Orleans. James searched his database of plantation records. River Oak Plantation appeared in multiple sources: census records, property assessments, business ledgers. In the 1860 slave schedule, conducted just 2 years after this photograph was taken, River Oak Plantation was documented as holding 127 enslaved people. 127 people whose labor created the wealth that paid for those expensive suits, that gold jewelry, that elegant studio portrait. But why document it this way? Elena asked. Why include the enslaved people in the backdrop at all, even hidden? James was quiet, thinking. In the 1850s, there was growing tension over slavery even in the South. Some plantation owners were defensive about their wealth, wanting to document their property and status. But there was also increasing criticism, even some guilt. Maybe this photographer created backdrops that showed the full truth while allowing viewers to ignore it if they chose. Elena found more photographs in the Beaumont collection. 4 other portraits showed similar backdrops, grand plantation houses with those same dark, barely visible figures in the background. In each case, wealthy white subjects posed in the foreground while enslaved people were rendered almost invisible behind them. It was a visual metaphor for the entire system: wealth and status built on the backs of people who were deliberately obscured, ignored, erased from the official story. But one photograph was different. It showed an older man, presumably the brother's father, seated in a chair. Behind him was a different backdrop, a simple painted garden scene with no plantation house, no fields, no hidden figures. On the back of this photograph, someone had written in faded ink, "Father, taken after the war, 1867. After the war. After emancipation. When there were no longer enslaved people to hide in the painted background." James contacted Dr. Patricia Williams, a specialist in historical photography and visual culture at Howard University. Patricia had written extensively about how 19th-century photography both documented and concealed slavery's realities. She arrived in New Orleans 2 days later. Photographers in the antebellum South faced a contradiction, Patricia explained, examining the projected image. Their wealthy clients wanted portraits that showed their status and refinement. But that wealth came from slavery, which was increasingly controversial even in the South, especially in cities like New Orleans with large free black populations and international business connections. She pointed to the hidden figures in the backdrop. Some photographers resolved this by creating backdrops that included enslaved people but rendered them almost invisible. It acknowledged the source of the wealth while allowing viewers to focus only on the white subjects. It was visual gaslighting. The truth was present but deliberately obscured. Patricia had brought examples from her research. Other photographs from the 1850s showed similar techniques: enslaved people rendered as tiny background details, painted so dark they nearly disappeared, positioned at the edges where eyes wouldn't naturally focus. But this Beaumont photograph is unusual, Patricia continued. Most photographers who used this technique were more subtle. These figures are rendered dark, yes, but they're numerous and detailed. Once you notice them, you can't ignore them. It's almost as if the photographer wanted someone, someday, to see the full truth. Elena researched the photographer. The partially obscured name on the card, combined with studio location research, led her to Marcus Delacroix, a free man of color who had operated a photography studio in New Orleans from 1855 to 1862. Delacroix had been one of the few black photographers in the antebellum South, serving primarily wealthy white clients who wanted high-quality portraits. In the archives of the New Orleans Public Library, Elena found a journal kept by Delacroix from 1857 to 1861. The entries were careful, written in formal French and English, documenting business transactions and technical notes about photography. But scattered throughout were observations that revealed his inner conflict. April 1858, the Beaumont brothers came today for their portrait. Young men, wealthy, educated, polite in their manner toward me. They speak of their plantation, their cotton yield, their prospects. They do not speak of the 127 souls who produce that cotton, who create that wealth. When I paint the backdrop for their portrait, I include them all, every person whose labor builds the Beaumont fortune. I render them dark, as my clients prefer, as my survival requires. But they are there. The truth is there, for anyone who chooses to see it. Elena read the passage aloud to James and Patricia. The room was silent. He was documenting the truth while pretending to obscure it, Patricia said. He had to please his wealthy white clients, but he also had to live with himself. So he created these backdrops that showed the full reality of plantation wealth while making it easy for viewers to ignore if they wanted to. James found more evidence in plantation records. The 1860 slave schedule for River Oak Plantation listed 127 enslaved people by age and gender but not by name. Census records showed the plantation produced 850 bales of cotton that year, worth approximately $42,000, an enormous fortune for the era. In the Beaumont family papers, James found letters from Thomas Beaumont to business associates in 1859 and 1860. The letters discussed cotton prices, shipping logistics, and concerns about political tensions over slavery. One letter, dated November 1860, just after Lincoln's election, revealed Thomas's anxiety: "The Northern agitators threaten our entire way of life. They do not understand that our prosperity, our civilization itself, depends on the system they seek to destroy. The system. Never the people. Never their names or their humanity. Just the system." Elena found one more photograph that changed everything. It was taken in 1863, during the Civil War, and showed a Union Army camp. In the foreground, Union soldiers posed in uniform. In the background, clearly visible and rendered in normal tones, were dozens of formerly enslaved people who had escaped to Union lines, men, women, and children, looking directly at the camera. On the back of this photograph, in the same handwriting as Marcus Delacroix's journal, someone had written, "Finally, I can photograph them as they are. Not hidden. Not darkened. Not erased. Finally, the truth can be told plainly." Patricia examined the photograph and the handwriting. Delacroix took this. After New Orleans fell to Union forces in 1862, he was free to photograph formerly enslaved people openly. This photograph is the opposite of the Beaumont portrait. The people who have been hidden in the background are now in the foreground, visible, dignified, present. Elena organized an exhibition at the New Orleans Historical Collection titled, "Hidden in Plain Sight: The Visual Concealment of Slavery in Antebellum Photography." She displayed the Beaumont brothers' portrait with detailed analysis of the hidden figures in the backdrop, alongside the 1863 photographs showing those same people brought into visibility. The exhibition attracted immediate and intense attention. Local media covered it extensively. National news followed. Descendants of the Beaumont family issued a statement acknowledging their ancestors' role in slavery and expressing support for the exhibition's educational mission. But the most powerful response came from the African American community in Louisiana. Genealogists and family historians arrived at the museum, studying the hidden figures in the backdrops, trying to identify ancestors who had been enslaved at River Oak Plantation. A woman named Dorothy Washington, a genealogist who had traced her family back to River Oak Plantation, stood before the projected image for over an hour, counting the barely visible figures in the painted scene. "My great-great-great-grandmother was enslaved there," Dorothy said quietly. Her name was Sarah. She was 23 years old in 1858, the same year this photograph was taken. She could be one of these figures. Hidden in the background of someone else's portrait. Her whole life, her whole existence, reduced to a dark shape that people were meant to ignore. Elena had arranged for high-resolution scans of all the photographs. Working with image specialists, they enhanced the painted backdrops, bringing out details that had been deliberately obscured. The enhanced images showed the figures more clearly: people bent over cotton plants, people carrying loads, people standing in groups, people whose forced labor had created the wealth displayed in the foreground. James coordinated with genealogists to match the number of figures in the painted backdrops with the documented number of enslaved people at River Oak Plantation. The numbers aligned almost exactly. Marcus Delacroix had painted the real population of the plantation into his backdrops, creating an accurate but hidden document of the people who were legally classified as property. Patricia discovered that Delacroix had created similar backdrops for other plantation families. In archives across Louisiana, she found 6 more portraits with the same technique: wealthy white subjects in the foreground, hidden human figures in the painted backgrounds. In each case, the number of hidden figures roughly matched the historical records of how many people were enslaved at that family's plantation. He was creating a parallel archive, Patricia explained. The official archive showed wealthy plantation owners and their privileged children. But hidden within those same photographs was evidence of the people who actually produced that wealth. It was an act of resistance disguised as compliance. A year after discovering the photograph, Elena stood in the museum's research library, working with Dorothy Washington and other genealogists who were documenting the names and lives of people enslaved at River Oak Plantation. They had located church records, bills of sale, plantation ledgers, and testimony from formerly enslaved people collected after the Civil War. Slowly, they were attaching names to some of those hidden figures. Sarah Washington, Dorothy's ancestor. James Freeman, a skilled carpenter. Elizabeth and her 3 children. Moses, who had been sold away from his family in 1859. Rebecca, who escaped to Union lines in 1862. Each name was a recovery of humanity that had been deliberately obscured. Each identity was a refutation of the system that had tried to reduce people to property, to background details, to dark shapes easily ignored. The Beaumont brothers' portrait had become famous, not for the wealthy young men in the foreground but for the people hidden in the background. It appeared in textbooks, documentaries, museum exhibitions across the country. Always with the same message: look closer, see what was hidden, recognize the truth that was deliberately obscured. Thomas and William Beaumont had posed for that portrait in 1858, proud of their wealth and status, probably never imagining that 165 years later, viewers would look past them to focus on the barely visible figures in the painted backdrop. The brothers had wanted to document their prosperity. Instead, they had inadvertently preserved evidence of the people they had enslaved. Marcus Delacroix had survived by appearing to comply with his clients' wishes while subtly documenting the truth they wanted to hide. His journals, discovered in his descendants' possession, revealed a man torn between survival and conscience, who had found a way to serve both by creating images that could be read 2 ways, as celebrations of plantation wealth or as documentation of slavery's reality. In one of his final journal entries, written in December 1862 after New Orleans had fallen to Union forces, Delacroix reflected on his work. For 7 years I painted those backdrops, rendering the enslaved people dark and small, making them easy to ignore. I did it to survive, to keep my business, to serve the wealthy clients who would tolerate a free black photographer only if I confirmed their preferred reality. But I always painted them all, every person, counted and documented in paint and shadow. I told myself that someday, someone would look closely. Someone would see past the wealthy subjects in the foreground and recognize the people in the background. Someone would count them, name them, honor them. I prayed for that day. Now it has come, though not in the way I imagined. The war has freed them from bondage. My photographs have freed them from invisibility. Both were necessary. Both mattered. Elena had those words engraved on a plaque beside the exhibition. Visitors would read them, study the photograph, see the hidden figures, and understand, sometimes the truth is documented even when it's deliberately obscured. Sometimes resistance takes the form of subtle inclusion rather than outright confrontation. Sometimes the most important details are the ones we're trained not to see. And sometimes, you just need to look more closely at the background to find the real story hiding in plain sight.